Hi, this is Cassandra with Houseplant. Today we're going to be talking about how to water your plants. This is part of our ongoing series, How to Live the Plant Life. So if you want to continue learning with us, make sure to subscribe below. So why do plants need water? There's multiple reasons. First, it's to help distribute the nutrients in the plant evenly. It also helps in the process of photosynthesis. And it also helps plants stay upright and firm, or turgid, as the technical term is called. Plants are 90% water, so it is actually rather interesting to see the differences in how they tell you that they're thirsty. When a plant is turgid, it is upright and rather firm. It's not going to be too bendy. Now, this does depend on the plant. Some cacti are very, very tall and upright and stick straight, and it's hard to tell. And sometimes plants like snake plants or ZZ plants, it takes quite a lot of drought to actually make them show the signs that they're thirsty. So certain plants you might want to be on a schedule like a snake plant or a ZZ, where you water roughly once a month just to keep them going with their water reservoirs down in their tubers. But with leafy plants like this, Photonia, you're gonna have to actually pay attention to your plant. And for the most part, this is what I highly recommend everyone who buys plants to get in the habit of. It's good to check the soil with your finger, but you also just need to look at your plant and see if it's telling you if it's okay, like this Photonia, or if it's thirsty, like this sad little golden pothos baby. So if the plant was well watered and turgid, it would be upright, and the soil will probably be dry on top, but halfway down you're going to have some dampness. That means the roots are still soaking up some water and keeping the plant upright and happy and distributing those nutrients. With this leafy plant, it's going to be droopy, and it's not good to let it go this dry every single time, because that can be actually rather taxing on a plant system, and over time could cause the plant to be weakened in its immune system, be more prone to getting pests. But for the purposes of demonstration, I thought I would show you what an actually very thirsty plant would look like. Another example would be a peperomia. Peperomias can actually sometimes get a little grayish in color as well. But as you can see, very well watered, still happy, still distributing its water throughout its leaves and stems. This one is extra floppy, a little bit paler in color, but it just is significantly more droopy. And generally, your leafy plants are going to give you some sort of droop, and that is going to be your indicator that it is time to water. Now, with cacti, you can actually go much longer periods of time in between waterings. This is a silver dollar apuntia, and as you can see, it's very, very wrinkly. It's drooping over a little bit sideways. This just means it does not have enough water to keep it upright, and we are really desperately at that point where it is time to give it some water. And after a few hours, either with the leafy plants and with the cacti or succulents, you're going to have them kind of come back upright, and they're going to be really firm to the touch instead of soft and flexible like this little cactus. The reason you can let cacti go this dry is because, for the most part, cacti and succulents are from rather arid regions in the US and around the world. They go long periods of time in drought, and then they take advantage of the infrequent rainfall, and they will soak up so much. They'll just soak it up, and that's why succulents are called succulent, because they're just juicy. But you have to make sure that when your cactus is getting watered or your succulent is getting watered, you can be generous in your watering, as long as you are having some drainage holes, you can really saturate it and let it drip out. But if you are in a closed system, like sometimes arrangements are in closed bottom containers, go ahead and make sure that you're being fairly generous with your watering, but you're only giving it enough to saturate the soil and not just leave a puddle down at the roots. So speaking of differences in how plants will react to how much water they'll hold, and how much you need to actually water depending on the container, you also need to think about what is your soil doing. You might find that after a long period of time in a container, your succulent soil or even your leafy green soils, they're going to be really compact, they're going to be cracked, it's going to be really hard on the surface and you can't even hardly wiggle your finger down in there. And that is when the soil has become compacted. And when soil becomes compacted, if you water on it, it might just go on the surface. And then if you can see, I've got some area that is just completely devoid of any soil. It's compacted in, it's just really tight. So water will hit this surface and then just go down the sides of the pot, and it's not even going to get to the root ball. What you want to do in a case like this, and this is good practice to do even like once a month, just as a little checkup on your plants as you go around, is to take something like a skewer, a chopstick, just some sort of thin little rod that you can stick down into your soil and start to gently break it up. I'm gonna set this down. So, as you can see, we're going to get that, work it in there, just kind of progressively get down further and further, do a little wiggle action, and we're gonna loosen up that soil to the point that water, when poured on there, is actually going to penetrate the root system and not just the outer edges of the soil ball that has formed in the pot. And this is an excellent thing to do just every once in a while. Okay. So now that we have our soil a little bit more broken up, we can talk about how to water. Plants like cacti, a lot of leafy plants in general, are going to be fine if you water from the top. And you would just pour and you would saturate the water all over there. You would let the water drip dry out. And in some instances, however, there are certain plants that might have a lot of fine hairs on their leaves. They might be a type that, at least here in the Midwest, where we're not getting as intensive light, a plant might be more finicky if it is watered on top of the surface and getting all the leaves wet. They might want to be watered from the bottom instead. So string of pearls is a really great example of a succulent that does much better if it is watered from the bottom, where it can just soak up what it needs and it's not left with a bunch of water just swimming around in the pot. And how you would bottom water is you would take a pot that has holes in the bottom and you would fill a bowl or a dish a few inches high with water, because what's going to happen is the water is going to be forced by gravity to go up, and then it's going to start getting sucked into the soil. And after a period of 30 minutes, maybe an hour, your soil should be a little bit damp on top, and that's a good sign to take it out of the water. Your plant is not going to immediately revive from being thirsty. It's going to take a few hours, and in some instances it might take a full day. Another thing to note is our plants need a little bit more amendments in some soils. So a fern is a good example, or a calathea, a prayer plant. they like really nice moisture holding soil because they're just always needing a little bit of humidity that will evaporate around the leaves, stay around the root system. They're used to much more tropical wet regions. Something like this, you could use a very dense soil that doesn't have too much going on. You just want to do an indoor mix of soil. But our plants like the golden pothos or a peperomia, they're going to want to add amendments to that soil. And that means the soil is not going to hold the water for too long inside of that container. So here at Honey Plant, we'll use something like rice hulls, or you can use something like orchid bark. And that will just create a soil that is more broken up and will allow the excess water to evaporate and just enough to stay around the root system without suffocating them. And then same goes for cacti. Generally you need to do a much grittier mix, and here we have a very sandy, gritty soil specifically for succulents and cacti that makes sure that the soil doesn't get too compact too fast. Now that we've talked about different ways to water and how to make sure your soil isn't holding too much or too little water, another question we get asked about is water quality. Water in general is fine if it's from your tap. Tap water is fine with a lot of plants, not really going to cause any issues. If you find that you have very harsh mineral-filled water, you might get some excess browning on your leaves and something like that, but that is a case-by-case basis. There are some plants like the prayer plants. Here's a maranta, here's a calathea, here's a stromanthe. They can be more sensitive to different types of water. So if you do find that you have really hard water or you have a lot of salts in your water, you might notice more browning going on in the leaves. And in that case, you could let your water sit out overnight. I find that if you let your water sit at least 24 hours, it's going to off-gas and it's going to settle some of those salts and minerals so that the water, when you pour on your prayer plants or more sensitive plants that show signs of distress a lot easier, you're going to have a little bit better results. If that isn't quite working for you, you can move on to distilled water where it's all those minerals and salts are completely depleted, but it's not something you need to try right off the bat. Usually letting your water sit and settle is enough for most city tap water. And try to remember that even if your plant is having some issues with browning or just looking a little wimpy, it might be light. I would always double check and just troubleshoot any lighting situation you have before you concentrate on watering your plant more or less, because more often than not, the plant is not going to be able to be saved unless it is in a good lighting condition, and you need to make sure that it's set up for success so that it can use the water. Light increases the metabolism for plants and allows them to actually use energy to distribute the water to where it needs to be. And lastly, let's talk about over versus underwatering. Overwatering is much more dangerous game to play. We highly recommend that you err on the side of underwatering your plant so that you can always give a little bit more, because if you go overboard and the water is sitting around those roots, they're just going to keep soaking it up until suddenly you have very mushy root system, which then the plant is basically starving because the roots have rotted away and it looks thirsty. But if you've been watering it every other day, you might have actually just rotted the bottom out and it is just dying from the bottom upwards. And it is much, much harder to come back from an overwatered plant than it is to come back from a little bit underwatered, slightly crispy leaved plant. You need to have those that root ball intact so that the cells that encourage growth are actually still there and can continue to push out new leaves down the road. And another issue that you might note if you've been overwatering, especially, you'll really see this in some peperomias, you'll see it in fiddle leaf figs. It's called edema, and this is either, like in fiddle leaf figs, it'll look like little brownish red spots, and you really see it on young leaves, and it'll just be speckled around, and that's from inconsistent watering. Probably got a lot, and then it went a little too dry, and the cells just end up rupturing because they've been holding too much water, and not necessarily a sign that the plant is unhealthy or anything like that, but you're just going to notice like it has little freckles all over the new leaves that eventually those seemingly go away because they stay the same size while the rest of the plant grows around it. Peperomias will get these weird little bubbles, and it's just a very rough feeling on the leaves, and that's a sign that, again, the cells absorbed too much water for too long, ruptured, and left kind of an odd texture on the leaf. And that's something that can dry out and grow out of over time. Just remember, it's better to underwater a little bit than to overwater, especially in your container plants. Outside, the earth is a natural drainage source, and it is a little bit harder to replicate that with our container-bound plants. So giving them extra amendments, making sure they're not swimming in water is going to give you the best opportunity to have the most luscious, beautiful plants. So thank you for watching. Please let us know if you have any questions down the road, and let us know what honey plant can teach you next time.